Welcome to episode 6 of the NeuroMarvels. Hello, Dana. How are you?
I'm great. Gwen, how are you?
I'm good. We are so excited to do this episode today. One, because I have a blast spending any kind of time with Dana. And also because we received such a thoughtful comment to our first episode. And it really dovetails nicely in today's topic, which is really dovetailing off of labels and talking about the label of disability and what exactly does that mean. Dana, what are your thoughts?
Yes, exactly. And I was, in getting ready for this today, I was looking up, how does the internet define disability? If you're in the United States, there's how ADA defines it. There's all kinds of different ways to look at it. What people typically think with a disability is, kind of visible disability, someone who's blind or, uses a cane, or kind of the stereotypes of that. But I found a really short and sweet definition that I liked. And that said, a physical or a mental condition that limits a person's movements, senses, or activities. And it really, it's the first time I've really seen senses in a definition of that, because it really does make the definition a little bit more broad. And we're going to talk today about not only how does someone define disability, what does it mean to you, but there's identity pieces attached to that, as well as we've talked a lot about in our previous podcast. It's not just about you as this person in a vacuum. It's about how the systems you're moving in see or don't see disability. Are your movements limited? And we always have to talk about some of the stigma and limitations of those as well. Assumptions of those.
Yeah. I mean, if we're going to really explore the label of disability and what it means, right? It really, I think about the social model. Using a social model to kind of find the definition of disability, meaning, you're as disabled as the supports and resources that surround you, right?
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Right. And I feel like that's a really fantastic way to look at disability, because if I think about someone who's blind, if they're in a community with no community accommodations, right? No braille, no auditory cueing at a crosswalk, no tactile types of environmental cues to know if you're going straight, you're turning a corner, you're going to hit a grade difference of some kind when you're walking. That person's going to look more disabled than someone in a community that supports.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think the difficulty here too is that many people need to be classified as disabled in order to get services and supports.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So we should really delineate that out. So an identity piece, someone can say, I'm disabled or I'm not disabled. What you're talking about is getting support services, the quote official. So whether that's getting assistance from the government, if you're on something like Social Security disability, getting supports in school, or getting supports at work, for example, right? Maybe you need more breaks than somebody else. Maybe there are certain kinds of projects that you're better working on than other people. And how do you communicate that to those systems? And you brought in that systems idea. So how do you get your needs met? You need to define, well, first of all, you need to recognize it yourself. You need to define what it is. And that's oftentimes the hardest part, right? That's why people come to you and I to get a sense of what exactly do I have going on, and where am I potentially disabled, or where do I have limitations? All these words are kind of marginalizing, so bear with us a little bit. But where do I need supports? It's not as easy sometimes to say, oh, well, I can't lift something over 50 pounds, right? That's pretty obvious. But if it's something like, what do I need in a learning condition? Do I have difficulty with an auditory lecture only? Do I need visuals as well? Do I need the notes ahead of time? Do I need frequent breaks? Do I need to be able to get up out of my chair and move around while the lecture is going on, that kind of thing? And whatever else that is. So someone may be able to identify their own needs very easily, but in my experience, especially if someone's new to it, they usually need a little bit of mentoring, a little bit of help to figure that out. And then sometimes the real uphill battle is getting that information and then going to whatever system you're in to have those needs met. So if you think about it on a micro system, it might be something like asking the teacher to give a copy of notes prior to the class so you can follow along, for example. If it's something, a larger system like in a city, can you walk around in a city and are there places that have Braille on elevators, or are there places that have ramps up and down the street, example, for someone who uses a wheelchair, those sort of things. So are those systems already in place, right? And everything in between, right? And the piece that a lot of people overlook and don't talk a lot about is that more of a microsystem, and that being within your family. I have a lot of clients who have the hardest time with family members accepting that they have a disability or trying to meet those sort of things. We certainly see that with autism, right? If someone is overstimulated and about to have a meltdown, this idea of, well, we're here, we came all this way, we parked, we're at this baseball game, we have to stay. Or is there something you can do when that person literally can't function in that moment because they're overstimulated? So there's education involved in all that too, in terms of the systems, right? In a perfect world, you get diagnosed, you go to your workplace or your school, they put those things in place and boom, you're good to go. But in my experience, it rarely goes that seamlessly.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things here that, just kind of pop into my mind. One is that that hidden disability, you were talking about being overwhelmed. We've covered this in other episodes about sensory sensitivity, sensory systems. And then I think the other piece that is inevitably entwined with that is a fight flight system, right? That stress response system. And that those things are hidden. You don't know that someone is necessarily overwhelmed. I mean, unless they have some overt behavior that's demonstrating that. But heaven forbid they're masking, which that's also covered on another episode, right?
Exactly.
They're working really, really hard to make whatever it is happen, right? So I feel like in disability access, advocacy, like self-knowledge and advocacy are critical to navigate the systems, whether that's the system of healthcare or school or university, college or workplace or your home or your family life, right? That you actually have to know and then advocate as the first kind of level to get your needs met. And as a psychologist, I think those are really hard areas.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, like, it's not as simple as it sounds, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And you bring up this idea of masking. Tend to see it a little less in kids because they haven't learned that yet. Those behaviors may be a little more overt. But I get all the time. I do have several things that contribute to my identity as a disabled person. And I get all the time people saying, oh, but you seem so normal, is the word. And but a lot of that is masking and just not, I'm the kind of person that wants to be independent. I don't like having those limitations. So I'll try and try and try. But I've learned over time to advocate for myself and get those needs met. That is a very hard thing to do. If you're talking about a child or someone that doesn't have that personality type, advocating is hard. As soon as you hit a barrier, if someone says no, kind of sulking off and like, okay, well, that didn't go well. So I have this with my students that need accommodations for learning all the time. Well, I've asked, it didn't go well. I've just learned to not ask. Or I've already asked that professor for the notes ahead of time 3 times and they're still not giving it to me. And I'll say, go back to the disability support office. They will advocate for you, but it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And the responsibility for that shouldn't fall on the disabled person. That's what's terrible. You wouldn't ask somebody who uses a wheelchair to be the one to go downtown and create all the ramps so they can get around downtown. It's ridiculous, right?
Yep.
So that becomes really hard and exhausting. And so there are these factors that go into masking, right? Is to try to kind of, we as humans want to present in a way that shows that we're not vulnerable. And so disclosing that and getting support is saying I'm vulnerable. And that's a really scary place to go, just usually for just about anybody, because there's judgment that can come with that. And then there's all kinds of assumptions that people have that come with that. Now, all of a sudden, they have a label on you and they don't see the complexity of who you are, right? And that's some of the feedback we've gotten from some listeners so far, is how complex all these issues are.
Yeah.
They don't fit into a nice, neat little podcast. It's much more complex.
Yeah. And that's what makes this podcast really fun, right? We get to explore the nuances of this topic, and that, it serves, unfortunately, this idea of needing to use the master's tools, right? Mm-hmm. In other words, you have to play with this system that can be reductionistic and can pathologize people in order to get the necessary supports and services that are needed for functioning. So maybe this idea even between the difference between equity and equality is so critical, right? It's not about being equal. It's about being equitable. And that's another challenging concept, I think, as we think about this disability, this idea of disability.
So I think people have seen this picture, and we've talked about it in here, where it's not about giving the same size ladder to each person who's different heights to see over a fence to see a baseball game. It's about giving different size ladders to each person so each of them can equally see over the fence. And that's that idea of equitability rather than equal, right?
Yeah.
The word handicap is actually still used in things like playing golf. So if you go play golf with someone who's really good at it and you're just starting out, they sort of penalize themselves a number of strokes so that you're on a level playing field. I mean, that idea sort of exists out there and people are familiar with it. But the strange thing happens when it comes to needing those things for disability. That's what was so groundbreaking about the ADA law in the United States, was that this is now a government sanctioned, this needs to be in place, right? We need to allocate funds for this and make places accessible to everybody. And that includes like learning environments and work environments and things like that, and everything it takes to get that, right?
Yep.
The other big barrier oftentimes is within the person themselves. So we've talked in here about, and I read a lot about, am I disabled enough, right? What does it mean? So this definition that I had written, physical or mental condition that limits a person's movement, senses, or activities. How do you quantify that it limits it, right? Is it according to my own judgment? Is it this external thing? But in the autism community, there's always a meme that floats around in different forms, but it always has the central message of, not disabled enough to get support services, but disabled enough to really be kind of left out in the cold, right? And so how do you then walk that bar? And I think we as a society tend to, again, back to that label, that person's disabled. Now all of a sudden there's an assumption they can't do anything, which is so not true, right? And that is a moving target on any given day. If you're really stressed on a day, there may be a task that you can normally do that's hard, but you can muddle through it. But on a day when you're totally stressed, you can't deal with it. It's cumulative, right? You haven't had that chance to rest. But this idea of being a disability imposter is something that I've struggled with a lot. I've gone back and forth between, so where I teach, the accreditation body that we have wants diversity in all ways. So I always put a little check mark in the box that next to the faculty that says there's a person that is disabled, right? It's good for the numbers. It sounds terrible. And then on the other side, I'm like, oh my God, if I identify as disabled, what does this mean? And are people really going to see me in a negative way? that Dana's not capable. And then it feeds into all of my own insecurities about not being capable. So it becomes this kind of vicious circle of wanting to gut it out, wanting to mask, wanting to be capable, wanting to gut it out, wanting to mask, wanting to be capable. And then that can lead to things like burnout, right? Having to advocate for yourself constantly can lead to burnout in the person or parents that are having to do this with small children. It's exhausting.
It's exhausting.
It's a constant uphill fight, right? These are the pit bull parents that have to keep going, keep going, keep going. So that sense of, am I disabled? Is it okay for me to use that label? Am I an imposter in doing that? And then it sort of is like, once it's out there, now what? What are people going to do with this? Am I going to be treated differently? Am I not only, it'd be great if I was treated differently and just got my needs met, but then there tends to be those, the proverbial people talking to you slower or, being really disparaging to you because they see the big D word. So there's a lot attached to it. It's a scary thing to put out there. It has been historically for me, and at times it still is.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that we necessarily live in a society that creates safe spaces for vulnerability.
Right.
And I think whenever you reveal or disclose something private about yourself that, is synergistic, let's just say, with your own psychological factors. I mean, we are a product or a culmination of our lived experiences.
Yeah.
And so if you historically have been rejected from advocacy or seen in these ways or been the recipient of hundreds of microaggressions, let's just say, right?
Yeah.
It's not so easy to trust that the system's going to get it. And again, this idea of talking about labels. So whether it's the label of autism, the label of disability or disabled, whatever that label is, I think what people are asking for is not to be reduced to a label.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that it's all too easy, right? We get that one little label and now I understand what's going on. I can move on with my day. It gets messy and takes time to get to know every individual person's various parts of them. Like you said, we're a function of our life experience, and that can vary from day to day, right?
Yep. Especially if you've got sensory challenges or, your alert system, your fight flight system, arousal system is sensitive, right? Yeah. Especially in those ways, those are energy sucks. They take energy that people don't understand. And I think a lot of my clients, I'll hear a lot of my clients say that they're extremely frustrated because they feel like they're tweeners. Right? Right? I'm in between stuff. I'm not disabled enough, right? But I'm also don't have as many skills or resources at my fingertips to make this easy either, right? But I'm stuck in this middle place, and that's also frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what comes to mind for me is this idea of, when do you have those limitations? What system are you in that creates those limitations? And then can you voice those, right? The tweener thing is something that I've had to work a lot at as well. And when I was looking a little bit yesterday about our topic today too, I saw a lot showing up on a couple things. One is different definitions of it, but this idea of what we call inspiration porn. I love this phrase, right?
Yep.
So we in this culture, if you ever watch shows like Good Morning America or those sorts of shows, and I'm not bashing GMA, I love GMA, but it's always like, this person, battled this disability and then ran across the United States anyway, right? There's never a part on this person has this disability and managed to get through their workday and come home and still have some energy to eat dinner, right? So it's always like there's this expectation of overcoming. There's this expectation of gutting it out and going back. What you were talking about with that fight or flight, we're still geared by all that physiology, which is to not show vulnerability, to be tough no matter what, right? and that other people find inspiration when you can be tough, even in there's a commercial out now where the little girl has sensitive skin. And I hear it every time. The dad says, I didn't know my daughter was battling sensitive skin. And I'm like, does it have to be battling? What the hell? But it really is all of that inspiration porn. Like, look how strong she is. She can do this despite the fact that her skin is itchy or whatever. So there's all of that intertwined too, that are those larger societal expectations versus someone saying, you know what, I need to sit down because we've walked 4 blocks and I need, to take a small break. And that people are going to look at that and say, oh God, what a pain. I'm not going to invite her next time because she has to rest. And it's just sort of the labels and the assumptions that we put on top of things really limit and constrict us. And so I can see why people fight that and don't feel safe putting that vulnerability out there. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that, there's this piece of being very tired. And many of my clients are tired.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
they're tired. And then, just psychologically, Dana, what happens when you put a lot of effort into something that you don't get a lot back from? We develop learned helplessness. Our motivations change, right? Like that's just a psychological construct that occurs with humans.
We're not supposed to say no. We're supposed to, just be as least of a pain as possible and, move on with our days. Yeah.
So this idea, I think, for us, it's really to create why we're having this conversation is to really give a place for someone to say, oh my gosh, I'm not like the only person that has this frustration about living in this world, or Dana, as you say, swimming in this pond.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's about representation, seeing different models. It's one of the reasons I'm more outspoken about my disabled identity. Because I do want other people to see that you can be certain ways, you can do certain things. They're different, right? So I love doing home improvement stuff. I'm tiling one of our bathroom walls. And, back in my 20s, I could have motored through that and done like the whole thing in a couple of days. Now I have to do it in smaller chunks, right? I have some musculoskeletal issues that don't allow me to do long sustained effort. So I'll do an hour and a half. And my wife told me something that was wonderful one day. She said, just keep doing those little bursts and eventually it gets done. And I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Right. So it becomes like different. I was just like, if I can't do it in 2 days, I'm not going to do it. So it really becomes a different way, way to frame it even yourself. And that can help some of that fatigue of exhausted fighting and this kind of thing. And how else could I do this that makes it okay? I'm also thinking of, abled, and we've talked about being ableistic, and the word disabled is, dis and then abled. So automatically we're putting something juxtaposed to being able-bodied. So I've had a lot of people not even like the word disabled, or modifying the word disabled to like differently abled or something like that, because it's still yoked in that idea of being abled. Why is this not just the depth and breadth of human experience? Why labels at all? And, we need to have those. If you're going to get support services or Social Security or something along those lines, you need the label. But I think we're talking about, just like we did with our very first episode, some of the danger of labels, some of the marginalizing of labels and the reductionisticness of labels, because once you put it out there, you can't control it anymore. This is the second time I've said this now. It's sort of like when I was coming out of the closet. Once I said the gay word, it's out there, and people have that same experience. Once it's out there, depending on where it's out there, people won't forget it. Now you're going to be looked at differently. And so a lot of that is just getting used to that. People are going to see me that way. Okay, maybe that's okay, I've had 21 surgeries in my lifetime that have to do with my musculoskeletal issue. And I'm like, okay, maybe I've earned my certificate. But really, did it have to get to that point? So our society isn't kind with these kinds of things. We do need to move beyond the labels and for the person who isn't disabled, for the people that are listening to this that want to do better as support people, or just really want to understand it better, just ask questions,
Yeah.
Get to know that person's variable of being disabled, just like anything else. How do you like your haircut? Do you wear makeup? What kind of clothes do you like? Do you buy Star Wars stuff? It should just be another thing that you get to know about them, right? But we put
It's
so
almost
much
like,
weight on it.
yeah, it's almost like, okay, so psychologically, stereotypes
Yeah.
Are there for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Cognitively, we rely on those in order to make decisions and judgments. And so we know that those exist. The brain wants to default to something easier because it wants to save, energy for other things. And so that, it can protect itself, protect the living being against, I don't know, tigers later. But but I think this idea of could one word ever capture who a person is? Yeah. Obviously not. If we said that to someone, like, no. So maybe the idea here is, could you collect 10 words, 10 adjectives before you even make a judgment? Can you collect more words about a person? Because I would never want someone to describe me in one word.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like a flat piece of paper. You wouldn't know anything about you. Yeah.
And it would completely depend on the kind of relationship I have. I mean, I think if I chose 5 random people in my life, they would come up with probably different words.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe not all nice, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't.
Because it depends on the perspective. This way, it's the 5 blind men and an elephant. Maybe a bad example because we're talking about a disability there, but they're all feeling something that is their whole truth that's in front of them and what they're feeling. But if you don't have the whole gestalt, you're not going to see the whole thing.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So how do we develop a bigger picture of somebody before we make judgments? And, for the audience out there who does struggle with not disabled enough, and that's impacting services and supports that are necessary and appropriate. The idea here would be, how can you help educate your systems about what you need? And you might have to come up with more words to talk about it. And I feel like the piece here that tends to be the hardest to educate people about are the hidden disability pieces. So that would be the sensory system, that would be the fight flight arousal systems, and that's also the mood based systems. And managing emotions and mood.
I'm
probably
thinking of
be
a
another
client
area.
Years ago, who had a one of those parking tags to be able to park in the disabled spots, and was what we call ambulatory, could walk on her own. To the external eye, there was nothing wrong. So she got, one day going to the grocery store, and someone cornered her and like, you can walk and there's nothing wrong with you, and why are you parking there? And she talked about how she struggles with depression and anxiety and agoraphobia. So she could park further away, but the stress of not knowing where she's going to be able to park, not knowing if she's going to get a spot close enough, she could still do it. She could still go to the grocery store and muscle through it, and then have to spend 3 days recovering from the energy drain for it. So for her, when she knows there's a spot there, she can depend on it. She can get in and out. She functions better. So that's the kind of thing we need the general public to be aware of, these hidden disabilities. It's not always present that you can see, and it's not always in the moment. That's another definition I found this morning when I was re-Googling it. It had to do with the fact that, and actually how ADA classifies someone to get Social Security is that they've had this at any point, and it isn't always present on any given moment, which I thought was really interesting. I think that's been a recent shift. So someone might have good days and bad days. They may be able to do one thing one day and not the other. And we have to shake loose of these rigid descriptions of it. And as a good citizen, Yeah, I've seen people get in out of their giant truck with the disability placard, and a little part of me is like, ah, you know. But then I remind myself, I'm not seeing the whole picture. There may be something going on there that I'm completely unaware of, right?
And
I've had clients that
you,
have support service dogs, and people are like,
yeah,
"What's wrong with you? Tell me your medical history." That's ridiculous. Sorry, I
yeah.
interrupted you.
No, it's okay, Dana. I think the reality too is that there are people out there that abuse the system. I mean, that's the
Absolutely.
problem, right? And the
Right.
problem is that hurts people
Yeah. Yeah.
who need these things.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
that's what muddies these waters,
Yeah.
is that I've known people who have hidden disabilities that need these things that get kind of nasty kind of feedback and
Yeah.
response in the
Yeah.
community. And I also have known people that abuse this and don't need to do it.
Yeah.
And that ruins it for other people. And so,
Yeah. Yep.
I guess the encouragement here is, how do we stay optimistic, and two,
Mhm.
how do we withhold judgment until we know more?
Yeah, and that's just sort of like
You know.
basic humanness that when you're
Yeah.
caught up in the events of your day, you may forget. I remember the day my mother passed away and going to the grocery store after that. And I don't know, I must have looked like a ghost walking through there. And the checker asked me a question 2 or 3 times, and I didn't answer. And she got kind of angry with me. And the person in line behind me just said, you don't need to do that. You don't know what kind of day she's had. And I thought in my head, if she only knew. And that really stuck with me, because when I see people, everybody occasionally accidentally cuts someone off in traffic. Every day someone occasionally, forgets to turn on their turn signal. These things that bother you or bother me, there may be other things going on in their life.
Yeah.
And what a wonderful world it would be if we sort of gifted each other that grace to say,
The generosity
I don't know,
of grace.
yeah, I don't know it all, and there may be something going on. But you're right. The people that abuse it, what we don't want to do is have those people run it for everybody.
Yeah.
If someone brings their nippy little, dog into a restaurant and they're not trained, and they're going to distract that person's service dog, that's not okay.
Yeah. And I've seen this. I mean, for those of my, for people who are coming over here that know me, like I love Disneyland, and I go often and capture lots of things for my audience. And it is not uncommon for me to see some of these things that can ruin it for other people, when, we have a dog that's not doing well in that environment. And it's causing quite a bit of stress, actually, not only for their owner, but for everyone else around. Right. So, and I don't know that story, but how does the mind not go there? How does the mind not go to that kind of judgment in those situations? And so, I guess part of this is, can we slow things down?
Yeah.
Can we slow our judgments down? Can we slow and even ask a question that offers another piece of information, or to let it go?
Yeah.
Or to not react to it in the first place. And I think, again, those are psychological concepts, Dana, that you and I, in our work, in our clinical work, help our clients with.
Yeah.
What do we focus on? The things that we have the power to control. And, sometimes that is the reaction that we have. I'm guilty of this, Dana. I'm so guilty of this.
We're human, right? I mean, we have to have judgments in the course of our day, or we'd never get out the door, because everything would be novel and new. We'd never finish anything. We do that as humans. Animals, that's how you survive.
Yep.
But deliberately, I really invite folks, next time they find themselves negatively judging someone in terms of a disability piece or a mobility piece or whatever it is, just check in with yourself. I mean, that's what I do. And I get angry because someone has a parking placard and they look perfectly able-bodied to me because I go there. That's the automatic thought, is to get angry at that person. And then the secondary thought is, oh, wait a minute, I don't know the whole story, right? If that were me, I'd want to be given the benefit of the doubt. Because there's so many, I would say the majority And the CDC defines it this way. The vast majority of folks who are disabled in a way that's not visible to anybody else at any given point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So keep that in mind, that, you probably know someone who's disabled and you don't know they are.
Yeah.
That's pretty compelling.
Well, and the disabled population is the largest minority in the world.
Exactly. Yeah, it's something like 25% of the population by the time they're 50. And then it goes way up after that because there's things
really
around aging that
skyrockets.
can cause that. Yeah, exactly.
Yep,
Exactly.
yep. And so, what we want to do is like just kind of challenge the idea of disability, remove the stigma from it, the negative stigma from it, really. Just as much as, removing stigma from mental health, right? Talking about emotions and anger and frustration and sadness and depression and anxiety, like removing the stigma from that. And really, I think empowering people to be like, okay, this is not, I'm not alone in the way that I'm in this world, swimming in this pond. What's one thing? Yeah.
One other thing, though, I think is really important is, to me, whether someone is disabled or not, it really is an identity factor.
Yeah,
and it
totally.
Should be they're the ones that own the rights to declaring it or not. Reason being, is I've talked with a lot of folks who are autistic and who vehemently disagree that being autistic is automatically a disability. And at first I was like, well, what are you talking about? But the more I heard the argument, the more I'm like, you're right. I don't think I don't think autism in and of itself for 100% of the people means they're disabled.
Yeah.
It really ought to be up to how that impacts that person, how much their experience of limitations or strife or however you want to say it are there. And it ought to be up to them to say, yes, I see my autism as a disability, whereas other people might say, I absolutely don't. And that's where that label thing gets tricky, right? It takes time to talk to different people and say, well, tell me more about that, which you and I were trained to do, the proverbial, tell me more about that, right?
Yeah.
We need to slow it down. Yeah.
We need to slow it down and get more information sometimes. And I know, like, we live in a culture and society of information overload. I mean, you can get anything you want just by Googling it. Going back, Dana, going back to identity, and this is why I love using the social model to define disability, which is you are only as disabled as the supports and services or the lack of, right? Yeah. Because you're right. Someone who's very well supported, who's autistic, may say they're not disabled. And because they're not experiencing the distress or having to work so hard to do what most people can do, right?
Right.
That makes sense to me, actually. And that it is an identity factor and that you own your rights to declaring who you are. And that can change. And that it can change. Like, that's another thing, just because you say it doesn't mean it's permanent.
Yeah. And even from day to day, and I think that's what confuses people. They might say, but you could do that yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is today. It's a different day.
Well, and that's when I think the skepticism can come in regards to, oh, you're manipulating.
Right.
So this person's manipulating. They just don't want to. They're lazy. They're unmotivated. They don't want to work. It's all of those kind of moral diagnoses that come in.
Yep.
When, again, maybe before that idea of that golden rule of, do unto others as you would want done unto yourself, I would want someone to give me the generosity of grace and understanding before you made a judgment about me that was negative.
Right.
That's all. Maybe that's what it is. And maybe we're being idealistic, but we can be idealistic here, Dana.
Yeah, let's try to promote that. More idealism.
More idealism, more optimism, more maybe grace and generosity for our fellow people on this planet. Well, audience, if you like what you're hearing and you're finding that you've come to the end of this episode, please subscribe and follow us and even leave a comment. That really helps us keep on doing this, and it helps
Yeah.
us create these spaces. And so we really encourage you, if you're listening to this, please hit that subscribe button or follow us wherever you might be listening or seeing this.
Yes, we'd like more people to have access to this. And that's
Yeah.
how we actually get pushed out a little more, the more people we get to subscribe. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Dana and I, we like to think of ourselves as disruptors, so that we can incite that positive change, one thought at a time, one person at a time, 1 minute, 1 second at a time. That's enough. And maybe if we do that all together, that can move the needle. So, thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Yes. And in the meanwhile, be good to yourself.